Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to hold on for a second, let everybody come into the meeting, into our webinar today. Thank you so much for being here, and happy Black History Month. So I'm very glad that you could all join us today for our conversation between Dr. Ronald B. Neal and Justin Desmangles on Dr. Neal's book, Beyond Death and Jail, Anti-Blackness, Black Masculinity, and the Demonic Imagination. We are hosting this program in partnership with the Before Columbus Foundation. I'm Shauna Sherman, manager of the African American Center. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are broadcasting from the area now known as San Francisco, which is on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place. We recognize that we benefit from living, working, and learning on their traditional homeland, and as uninvited guests, we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples and wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community. As the African American Center, we also give an ancestral acknowledgement adapted from the San Francisco African American Reparations Advisory Committee. We honor the gifts, resilience, and sacrifices of our Black ancestors who toiled the land, built the institutions that established this nation's wealth and freedom, and survived anti-Black racism despite never being compensated nor fully realizing their own sovereignty. We acknowledge this exploitation of not only our labor, but of our humanity, and through books, events, and educational programming, we are working to repair some of the harms done by public and private actors. Like I mentioned, happy Black History Month. We're in the middle of February, so I hope you have been enjoying all the wonderful events that are happening, even at the San Francisco Public Library. Here we call Black History Month more than a month because we celebrate Black history all the time, especially through the African American Center. And through February, our entire system is celebrating with events for the whole family. You can check out what's going on our events page to see what's happening. For those of you who don't know about the African American Center, we are located on the third floor of the main library in a space created in 1996 by community fundraising. The center holds a collection of books by and about Black people, and we host programs, conduct outreach in the Black community in San Francisco, and also help organize exhibits. In the space right now, we have an exhibit by Hunters Point born Malik Seneferu. It's a retrospective of his work, his 30-year career, and includes original paintings, sculptures, and reproductions of his work, and that will be on in the center through April 20th. And if you're in the area, I encourage you to come up to the main library and see it. On Saturday, and we're also going to be hosting a program on the Black Kung Fu experience. We'll be showing the film and also seeing a live Kung Fu demonstration by Troy Dunwood. Please stop by. And on Tuesday, February 18th, we'll be hosting author Dr. Akila Cadet, to talk about her book, White Supremacy is All Around. And that's in partnership with the Booker T. Washington Community Center. And last but not least, our last program for Black History Month is going to be a screening of new films by Dante King that discuss whiteness and anti-Blackness, and that too will be in person on Sunday, February 23rd. So if you're not local and can't make any of our events, I could encourage you to check out our San Francisco Public Library YouTube page where we post many of our previous events that have been recorded. And I want to thank the staff that help make our events happen at the library. And today, I want to especially thank my colleague Rachel, who's behind the scenes helping us run this webinar. And thank you to the Friends of the San Francisco Public Library who help fund our programs through the African American Center's endowment. If you want to see more about what's happening for more than a month through the library, you can visit our webpage on.sfpl.org/more than a month and see the full suite of programs that we have to offer. So on to our show for today. I'm really grateful to Justin Desmangles for hosting this program with us. He is the chairman of the Before Columbus Foundation, and in the last almost 30 years of the center, I think Justin's been working with us for maybe about 20 of those years.
That's right.
So again, I want to thank you for your continued partnership and the ideas you bring to our audience.
Thank you.
Um, you're welcome. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Neal and Dr. Desmangles to the web today to talk about about a book that calls for a complete reassessment and overhaul of the ethical, political, and religious thinking with respect to anti-Blackness and Black masculinity in the United States. The author, Dr. Ronald B. Neal, is an associate professor in the Department for the Study of Religions at Wake Forest University. He holds a PhD in religion from Vanderbilt University, and Professor Neal is a theorist of religion and culture whose primary area of teaching and research is African American religious studies. He is the author of Democracy in 21st Century America, Race, Class, Religion, and Region. And he also does teaching and research in other areas, including world religions, religion and popular culture, religion and political culture, and gender studies in religion. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Ronald B. Neal and Justin Desmangles to the screen.
Thank you so much, Shauna. I appreciate your time and consideration, and it is a pleasure and an honor to welcome Dr. Ronald B. Neal to this early evening.
Thank you.
I'll say right from the beginning to our audience, Ronald, that you are extraordinary as a writer because you really very much indeed are in the tradition of the blues, in the sense that this is the book that tells it like it is. And that tradition of the blues, which is really as quiet as it's kept, an emanation of African antiquity.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is both refreshing, but also medicinal to find the power of your work at this moment in our history, because I believe it can be said that we really are in a state of triage, or something that might be likened to triage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so to some extent, you know, this book in that tradition of bringing wisdom and ways of understanding the world and interpreting our experience that are consistent, again, with this emanation that I described as having its origins in African antiquity.
Mm-hmm.
So I am deeply grateful for the work that you have committed to Ronald Neal.
Thank you. No, thank you for that, and I'm so humbled and delighted to be here in conversation about the book, and I have to affirm what you said. Yeah, I am a blues man.
Yes,
So,
indeed. Yes,
and
indeed.
it's reflected all over the book, man. You know,
It certainly is. It
and
certainly is.
the third one of the chapters is titled "The Thrill Is Gone." You
The
know,
thrill is gone.
and you know where that comes from. You know,
I
so
do.
and so I was very deliberate in making it clear as to what my sensibilities are in terms of
Mm-hmm.
the content, subject matter of the book. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't have too much time. Uh,
Okay.
Certainly not enough. And I hope that this is just the beginning of this discussion. So I'm going to jump right into it
Okay.
with an area that I believe many of the people in our audience are already familiar with.
Yeah.
And that has to do with the conflation and
Mm-hmm.
confusion that emerges most specifically from a so-called Christian doctrine,
Mm-hmm.
which conflates and confuses suffering with redemption,
Yeah.
or suggests very forcefully that to suffer is to be redeemed. Now, over the last 400 plus years, this equation of suffering and redemption has been enormously damaging.
Yeah.
And the impact is something that you begin to talk about in the chapter you mentioned, The Thrill Is Gone. But
Mhm.
as we open this evening's discussion, Ronald Neal, can you talk to us about what you have disclosed and uncovered and revealed about this sinister equation, which has been so forcefully put upon us, suffering and redemption?
Yeah, no, no, absolutely, absolutely. And what it is that um, Black Americans have been viewed in, messianic redemptive ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have been viewed rather as sacrificial lambs. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I just give an example. So when you think about slavery,
Mm-hmm.
okay, the African was sacrificed for the sole purpose of advancing this Anglo-American civilization. Okay. In other words, people have to die. Okay. You have to go to the cross in order for someone else to benefit from your death, to advance things. And in every period of Black people's sojourn in this uh, North American context, we have been burdened with this um, demand to give ourselves over to death, to martyrdom, suffering, service, all sorts of things. So you've got suffering, you've got service, you've got sacrifice, you've got death. Okay. And this has been at the core of our condition, um, uh, particularly as it had been socially engineered by the a particular brand of Christianity, Protestant Christianity, what have you. The Africans who were brought here in the 17th century, they were not Christian. The vast majority of them, they were either Muslim or they were practitioners of, African spirituality and what have you. But over generations, Christianity was imposed upon them. And they accepted, what happened. It was imposed, and, the Africans, enslaved Africans, eventually became and converted into Christianity, and it became a part of our identity. You understand? And it has been, I would say this, um, at a micro level, Black people have used it to advance, African American interests. I give you an example. So, like, we created the churches, the AME Church, and what have you, and these became kind of resistant forces to white supremacy. But with that, there was an understanding that you would have to pay the ultimate price for freedom, and that's death. So
Mm-hmm.
we've produced an entire, tradition of martyrdom, you
Mm-hmm.
know, um, beginning in the 17th century, which has, extended across the times up to this present moment. And I would say, when we talk about redemption, the most popular figure and face that kind of personifies that is kind of Martin Luther King Jr., you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and him being a Christian, his leadership and what have you, and the ultimate price that he paid with
Yes.
his life, and and how that was connected to other lives that were also sacrificed. Medgar Evers, Emmett Till, so many other people who became martyrs before him and then even after him, subsequent to him, and what have you. And
Mm-hmm.
when you look at that, these deaths, um, though horrible and despondent that they are, they they push certain interests. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, the sacrifice of people in the 1960s and the 50s and 60s through civil rights and Black Power and what have you were instrumental in expanding notions of American democracy and exceptionalism and stuff like that.
That's right.
Anglo-Saxon supremacy, you understand, with kind of marginal benefits for Black people, you understand. Um, but it is at this moment in time, you know, and I say this in the book, I find it an obsolete type of morality that
Indeed.
it is detrimental to the lives of Black people, primarily because it does not serve the interests of the Black population. It does not enhance, ultimately, in a very robust way, the prospects, the life prospects of Black people. What it does, it advances the prospects of others, namely white interests.
That's right.
White interest.
That's
Okay.
right.
So here's the thing. The reality is that so white society has not produced a messianic tradition comparable to what we have among Afro Americans. Okay, that we have not produced a Martin. White Americans have not produced a Martin Luther King Jr. The
Mhm.
closest that you can get to that is maybe a John Brown.
Mhm.
we
Right.
we have few figures in American history who are white who are like John Brown. You know,
Mhm.
Malcolm X was famously talked about John Brown as being the only white man in history
Mhm.
that he would only ally with, okay?
Mhm.
Because John Brown was willing to put his life on the line to destroy a wicked institution, i.e., slavery,
That's
okay?
right.
And to get rid of the scourge. And so here's the thing, no one else is asked in this society to engage in this type of sacrificial morality. No other
Mhm.
group.
Mhm.
White Americans in general,
Mhm.
in particular, white women are not asked to engage in this type of morality. Other ethnic minorities who are not white, who are white adjacent or what have you, they're not asked to engage in this type of sacrificial morality. It is only Black Americans. We are asked to carry the burdens of other human beings, other
That's
groupings. So we're talking right now in this moment, very interesting time, 2025, um, and you have so many people over the last decades who have been classified as, you know, allies or what have you, who hide behind Black people, who
that's
hide
right.
behind the messianic morality. You die for us. We're not going to die for you. You die for us.
Mhm.
Okay? We're not going to sacrifice and everything. We expect you to take all of the bullets. We expect you to go to jail. We expect you to sacrifice your livelihoods. We expect you to pay the
Mhm.
ultimate price because this is the role that you've played in history,
Mhm.
and this is how we have understood who you are in this society. And so the point that I make is that this is a deleterious demand and morality, which no longer serves a beneficial purpose to Black Americans.
Now, I want to penetrate this and illuminate it a little bit further here because it addresses also a core issue that repeats and revolves throughout the book, and it has to do with the question of freedom
Hmm.
and its relation to the imagination
Hmm.
and the very categories that we employ to describe our experience. Now, here, as you're letting us understand, this equation of suffering and redemption has
Hmm.
actually been extraordinarily debilitating. It has
Yes.
created almost a cult of martyrdom.
Hmm.
And this overburdening of
Hmm.
Black Americans to forgive and forget,
Yes.
to move on, allegedly. You know, I'd like to talk about how this structure, this very sinister and egregious structure, has affected uh, our lives in terms of how we imagine ourselves to be free.
Yeah.
Uh, all of us will recall one of the few songs that became a hit
Hmm.
for Nina Simone during her lifetime.
Hmm.
The title was I Wish I Knew. how it would feel to be free.
Hmm.
The question of knowing what it actually feels within our sensorium is
Hmm.
something that is not entirely familiar. In
Hmm.
other words, what I'm trying to suggest is through this debilitating equation of suffering and redemption and the confusion that comes from that,
Hmm.
it has delimited and sequestered our imaginations
Yeah.
in terms of what we allow our very discussion of what it means to be free.
Hmm.
Could you talk to us about that, Dr. Neal?
Yeah, yeah, because what it does it censors our sensibilities towards self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
It prevents us from being unapologetically um, affirmative in terms of self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
Self-interest that don't have to involve the interests of other groups. That
Yes,
is kind of an uncompromising self-interest. And that minimizes our capacity to think about what it means to be fully free, to be fully human, and what have you. You understand? So it is okay for the white population. The white population doesn't have this burden.
right.
The white population doesn't have a burden um, to be messianic and to negate its own self-interest. The white population, as we have seen historically and in the present, is notoriously aggressive about its own self-interest.
That's
Okay,
right.
self-preservation, that sort of thing, and that's a part of freedom. Um, the to imagine that you can affirm your existence, your being in the world, okay, independent of other entities, of
Mm-hmm.
other groups, or what
Mm-hmm.
have you. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
And part of the problem is that, so it goes back to the Christian tradition, and this is the problem, that the Christian tradition in many respects is a self-effacing tradition. Okay, it's a there's a doctrine that's within the Christian tradition. It's called the kenotic doctrine,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called self-emptying. That is that you relieve yourself of ego. You
Yeah.
relieve yourself of any kind of interest in your own self-preservation so that you can enhance the existence of other human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And at a it seems noble and virtuous, particularly at a very microscopic level. Okay. One to one or whatever, or some small scale, maybe in a village or what have you. But when you're talking about politics, and you're
Yeah.
talking about economics,
Mm-hmm.
when you're talking about history, and you're talking about having dealt with conquest and domination, okay? This type of self-emptying, non-egoistic perspective is destructive. But because what it does is it commits you to being a slave. It's a slave morality
Right.
fundamentally.
Right.
Christianity, there's a relationship between Christianity and slave morality, which in the Greek world and all that, and even, in the New Testament and all that, the Apostle Paul, the Christians, they used slaves to talk about themselves, the slave analogy. This is what it means to be a Christian, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to think about it that Christianity was very useful during our enslavement in terms of slaves being obedient to the masters and all that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
um, which demands that you just completely negate
Mm-hmm.
um, your own self-interest and even ego, that there is something wrong with that. So what
Mm-hmm.
happens is we have a hard time. It's a very difficult time because of our conditioning in this country through religion, Christianity in particular, Protestant version. Okay, we have a hard time of thinking of our existence outside of that framework and
Right.
and those categories and what have you. And so it limits our imagination. It limits it,
Yes.
okay?
Yes.
Because we're constantly making reference to this redemptive thing, going to the cross and what have you. So when a black person dies or a black person gets killed by the police, a black man or a black woman or what have you, it is always read through this type of redemptive
Mhm.
framework, okay? And what happens is, well, there's a larger purpose for this person being killed. So Trayvon Martin, I'll give you an example. So you look at what happened in 2012 when he was murdered by the private citizen and everything like that. And you know what happens, you have this rebirth of activism or whatever. Well, here's how you rationalize it. Well, Trayvon Martin's murder sacrifice gave birth to this new movement.
Mm.
And here we are out here in the streets and we're protesting and we've resuscitated the the dead energies uh,
Mm. Mhm.
from the past or what have you. And now we're, you know, dealing with police brutality and we're dealing with private citizen violence and all this kind of stuff. And now we can really deal with structural racism. That's
Mm.
a very, very warped way of understanding our existence, the existence of Black people in the
Mhm.
world.
Mhm.
Trayvon Martin's death was horrible. It wasn't redemptive. It wasn't messianic. Okay, you don't want to look at, and this is the argument that I make. It is dangerous to continue to look at these type of events through this type of lens because it limits our understanding of freedom. You
Mhm.
understand?
Mhm.
Yeah, and the other part of it is that, you know, there's a demand. So, okay, Black people get killed, um, and with this Christian framework, those who are implicated by it insist through a Christian lens that we forgive, that we reconcile, that this problem is not really as big as it's made out to be, or what have you.
Mm.
We've gotten over this before. This was just one bad actor. This was just one bad apple in
And
the
all that.
all that kind of stuff. Let's move on and what have you. And that is used in a very manipulative way.
Mhm.
It's kind of like Martin Luther King Jr., you know. You have, and I was sharing this with the class recently. You know, we every January we commemorate his life and what have you. And I was telling my students that you know, one thing that happens whenever we have these moments of tumult in our society is that you have particular individuals within white society. When Black people start reacting in ways that white people don't like,
Mhm.
that are outside the messianic framework, okay, then they'll throw Martin Luther King, their version of Martin Luther King Jr.
Sure.
at us. That is, you know, King was nonviolent. Don't engage in nonviolent, engage in peaceful protests, you know, that sort of thing, you know, do the right thing, the Christian thing. So it's used, forgiveness, reconciliation, that whole messianic creed is also used to keep us in place, to control us. You
Mhm.
understand?
Mhm.
And so that's where you know I think and I argue that this is detrimental. This is an obsolete morality that needs to be discarded.
Mhm. And I would like to return at some point very soon to this question of forgiveness, which
Yeah.
is another set of principles which has been thrust upon us and has been very, very damaging. But before we do that, I'd like to return briefly to something you said a few moments ago in respect to the murder of Trayvon Martin. Now, in the larger spectrum of the history of the United States, and obviously going back before that, but
Mhm.
just for the moment, we'll stick to the United States.
Yeah.
Um, the extrajudicial murder,
Yeah.
whether by police or by vigilantes, of Black Americans
Mm-hmm.
has really, in fact, in point of fact, become a constituent right, RITE,
Mm-hmm.
within the culture of the United States. In other words, what I'm trying to say, to follow up on the point you just made, is that the assertion, which we hear over and over again, and you brought it up, that this was a bad apple, that this was some kind of aberration of the system.
Mm-hmm.
No, this, in point of fact,
Mm-hmm.
is how the system was meant
Mm-hmm.
to operate. It
Mm-hmm.
is integral to the system itself
Yeah.
that these men and women are allowed to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I use the word right because I'd like to focus there for a moment, because I believe in observing these murders, this
Mm-hmm.
mass of murders,
Mm-hmm.
and as well as what takes place within the prisons,
Mm-hmm.
the repeated over and
Mm-hmm.
over and over again, the stories that we hear of torture and murder within the
Mm-hmm.
prisons. States
Mm-hmm.
like Alabama, where the prison population is 183%
Yeah.
above, right? Where it's supposed,
Yeah.
states like Arkansas, Louisiana, where we have Black boys and men who have been
Mm-hmm.
held for years without
Mm-hmm.
bail,
Yeah.
never arraigned before a judge,
Yeah.
just merely charged with something. So the
Mm-hmm.
point that comes out of that, and you'll respond here, is
Mm-hmm.
that I believe that rather than this being an aberration or a mistake, that this is actually integral to the quasi-religious view that is held by the Anglo-American establishment,
Mm-hmm.
that it is not in any way arbitrary, that it is part of the very structural, the very design. Could you respond to that, Ronald?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you were speaking, I thought about Orlando Patterson, in the 90s, late 90s, he had that very important book that he put out called Rituals of Blood,
Mm-hmm.
where he talked about the consequences of slavery across 2 centuries and what have you. And he talks a lot about lynching in Rituals of Blood and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing. So there's this need to control the population and social control. And the torture, the murder, the incarceration, the cruel and unusual punishment, okay, is integral to that. In order to keep this population in its place, to discipline it, to keep it in an orderly fashion. And here's where the sacrifice comes in at. Okay. So yeah, we put, and I say we, I'm talking about the American Empire and what have you. We put black men and black boys on a cross,
Mm-hmm.
um, in jails, in prisons, and in other ways in order to assert dominance and control. You understand? And it's, I mean, you think about lynching, you know, lynching, lynching was a ritual, was a highly ritualized activity
That's
that
right.
took place in the South. It was a religious activity.
That's
Okay.
right. That's exactly
You
right.
think about the murder of Emmett Till. Okay. That was ritual activity, you know. We still don't know how many bodies are in the Mississippi River in
That's
terms of
exactly right.
who were, people who were killed over the generations, you understand? And um, that was used to keep black populations in their place. And even, I was talking about Frederick Douglass with my students in the course I'm teaching right now called Black Messiahs and Uncle Toms, and his whole situation with Covey, the man who, the enslaver and all, and you had these people, you had
Breaker.
these the nigger breakers,
That's
right?
right.
The nigger breakers from the Caribbean, the nigger breakers in North America and what have you.
Who became police?
Yeah, and they became police, yeah. and they would break you would get broken in public, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But either before a whole bunch of white people, or you get broken in front of black people
Mm-hmm.
as a way to regulate your behavior and that sort of thing. So you turn, and that's the thing. If the black person doesn't voluntarily give themselves over to this type of messianic thing, it happens involuntarily. You are sacrificed. You
Mm-hmm.
understand? And that's the thing about, Christianity and the cross. So, New Testament, you have these, the sensibility where, Jesus is like, I, Lord, take this, God, please take this cup from me. I really don't want to do this, but, if I must, I must do it. You have God sacrificing their son, and it goes back even pre-New Testament, but even to the Hebrew Bible, the story of Abraham sacrificing, taking his son Isaac up Mount Moriah to be sacrificed.
To be
Okay,
sacrificed.
yeah, to be sacrificed. Understand, and all the way going to the mountain, laying him down um, and coming close to doing it before he has stopped. You understand? So this is the thing. This is the kind of condition that in orientation that Black Americans have been subject to, and we have been taught to accept this, that this is the way it is, and what have you. You have to make examples,
Mm-hmm.
sacrifices. It is no coincidence that the Black male in this country um, is often sacrificed publicly to make huge statements
Mm-hmm.
about decency and
Mm-hmm.
public order
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It is no it's no coincidence. I'll give you, the
There's
man.
many recent examples.
Yeah, yeah, all kind of stuff, and even people. And I would say this includes people who are not flawless, who are not without problems and what have you. It goes back Jack Johnson and the Mann Act. We can talk about a whole bunch of figures, public figures, when you see the black celebrities and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
When you have black men, let's just say, who engage in some of the same kind of questionable activities that white men engage in.
Mm-hmm.
But the punishment and the spectacle that is directed towards them is exponentially higher
Mm-hmm.
than what you find with the white males or what
Oh,
have you.
times 1,000,
Yeah,
easy.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
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 That's that sort of thing, And I give the example. As I remember when with the Me Too movement and everything, and you had Bill Cosby and you had a Harvey Weinstein,
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
I literally I had white people tell me that Bill Cosby was worse than Harvey Weinstein, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Not to, and I don't say this to, there's no defense of Bill Cosby, anything like this, but it's like you have these two figures who are accused of these heinous activities, right? Um, but I literally, as a white male professor, literally said to me that Cosby was worse than Weinstein. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and and when you look at how he was dealt with in the public, and again, I have to qualify this and make the caveat: there's no defense of. I'm trying to make a point
Mm-hmm.
about the spectacle and the sacrifice and what is exacted upon a black male body in light of how this society seeks to control black men in particular and black people in general.
And I think also to turn our attentions to the question of the demonic imagination,
Yeah, the demonic,
which
yeah.
which is to put it far too simply, because we'll expand on this momentarily. But that's part of what we see at work too, because the prurient imagination that is so salient and salivating among the dominant culture's popular culture point of view on Black Americans, it's just a hair's breadth away to project all of this demonic imagery upon a Black man or a Black boy because of the depths of not Black repression, but the dominant culture's repression of its own instinct. You know, many people have written about this. I think perhaps most famously Calvin C. Hurt in Sex and Race in America. Baldwin speaks of it too. But this question of the projection, we saw it most recently, I think, in cases involving Eric Adams, or Sean Combs. Again, engaging in behavior that among their own white brethren would have been considered normative. But again, the demonic imagination comes into play, and the Black American is reduced to a metaphor or an analogy of someone else's intentions, agenda, etc. But I do want to return if we can, because obviously we're going to get into that about the demonic imagination. But this question of forgiveness, not long ago we were speaking about how there is this overburdening and overdetermination on Black Americans exclusively to suffer as the redeemers, even perhaps the conscience of so-called white America. But this has taken on a constituent of also enforcing this idea that we ought almost compulsively forgive the terror, the horror, the murder, but also the economic and social degradation, the economic exploitation, all these things we were always already being asked to forgive. And I would just take that a little further and say, along with his ugly cousin, forget. And here's my point, and then Ronald, you'll respond to this. I don't believe that we, at this stage in history, should even be contemplating any aspect of forgiveness. And the reason why I say that is because it wasn't until 2010 that an atlas was published of the transatlantic slave trade. That's how long it took to even get an atlas in print. We still are only beginning to examine, thanks to Emory University, the ship's manifests of these hundreds of thousands of people who were brought to the so-called New World, millions who were brought to the so-called New World. And as you mentioned, in respect to the Mississippi River, we have no idea. So Ronald, what is all this business about forgiveness, and why has that become such a debilitating force in Black America?
Well, it's like, in the book, The Thrill Is Gone, I talk about what happened in 2016 in Charleston, South Carolina, with those Black people at Emmanuel Methodist Episcopal Church, who were targeted by a white supremacist, 19-year-old white male who had studied that church, knew the history of that church, knew its messianic history, It was calculated. It was planned. He knew what he was doing, and he killed these Black people in this Bible study, and before the bodies could, get cold or anything like that, you have the children of those people, some of the children, publicly, and it was on the news, saying, "We forgive you." We forgive you. We forgive you. We forgive you. Okay. Obama eulogized the pastor as well as those who were killed in that. And Obama basically rationalized and legitimized their murders through the
Mhm.
redemptive thing.
Mhm.
That, God has a larger purpose for
Mm.
this thing right here.
Mm.
Okay. And what it does, what forgiveness does is forgiveness is a form of censorship. That is, it censors the reality of terrorism. It censors the history and genealogy of terrorism. All
Mhm.
right. It worked to protect the person he was protecting. If you go back and you read Obama's eulogy, it is clear, at least in my eyes, that he's protecting this murderer,
Yes.
saying that this murderer was used by God. And I'm
Mm.
like, used by God for what? You understand? Um, and here's the thing, and I said this in that chapter. So when we have terrorism in the United States to other groups, we had 9/11, um, when there were other terrorist activities in the world, and I mentioned this in the book as well. It's like the response of presidents is very different. When other people are killed by terrorists on American soil or in some white country or whatever, there's no talk about forgiveness and redemption. They want justice. You know, when September 11th happened, George Bush wanted revenge. He didn't want no justice. He wanted revenge. Okay. Um, Same thing what happened, and that happened the terrorist attacks in Paris when Obama was still in office. He was talking about justice. He wasn't talking about forgiveness. You understand? And
Completely
that's
different standards.
and that
Completely different.
two different standards. So here's the thing, you minimize domestic terrorism towards black people, not just minimize it, but you trivialize it and you erase it. But when it comes to different other kinds of terrorism, these are national security issues. They take on a higher level of significance and urgency. You understand? And so when this happens, this teaches the entire world that our murders mean nothing, that our deaths are not to be taken seriously, and that this is just, excuse my language, another N word that's dead.
Right.
Okay, that is it. You understand? And this is something that I think has to be denounced aggressively. It doesn't serve black folks. This is a morality that um, has outlived um, its usefulness. I'll put it like that, And the 10 years of activism that I talk about in the book from 2012 to 2022, is indicative of that. You know what I mean? And it stifles the imagination. It stifles how we think about freedom, in America. And I'll just say this. So it's like, okay, we're in a moment. We just had an election um, where one party lost. And, for the last at least 10 years, there's been one demographic that has been elevated as the kind of messianic saviors of the party, right? The black woman.
Mhm.
So black women have been useful in recent years, within the last 10 years, not even go further than that, but they have been very useful in maintaining this destructive messianic morality. You
Mhm.
understand? This sacrificial morality and what have you. And again, and that impedes, our ability to think about freedom and what have you.
Mhm.
And then On top of that, what happens is that, see, here's the thing about the forgiveness and all this kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
I give an example. So it's like you have someone like a David Brooks. David Brooks, who was
Columnist at the New York Times.
columnist in New York Times and what have you. I talk about him in the book in relationship to Ta-Nehisi Coates
Mhm.
and responding to his writings and stuff like that. And Brooks, who's Jewish, he tends to look at America through this redemptive lens, you know. And when Coates wrote his book, Between the World and Me, Brooks took exception to the book because he thought the book was too pessimistic about the United States and what
Mhm.
have you. And Coates is not an atheist. He doesn't believe in the stuff that I say is obsolete. You understand?
Yes.
But Brooks wants to maintain this redemptive view of America. Okay, yeah, we had slavery, but we got over it. We had Jim Crow, but we got over it. We're dealing with this stuff now, but we're gonna get over it. You understand what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, we have these cycles of death and life, or death and birth, and we just
Mhm.
have to go through these cycles,
Mhm.
even though the cycles demand that black people die.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Nobody else, no one has to be expunged
You're right.
cycle. You understand?
Right.
White people are not dying,
Right.
for this stuff.
Which, if you'll forgive the interruption, which is precisely why I use the term right, as in religious right, in
Yeah.
respect to these extrajudicial murders and vigilante murders and murders within the prisons, because it is
Yeah.
a right.
Yeah.
In other words, it produces a reciprocal effect in which the Anglo-American domination of the country is revived and resuscitated and reimposed every single time. We're not going to look at
Absolutely.
it that way, but that's what he knows is true. He knows
Absolutely.
it's
And,
true.
and I will say this, even, you look at the death penalty, you look at death penalty cases. Why is it that um, black men have been the face of capital cases, capital, and death row stuff? You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Why are we the faces of that? You
Mhm.
understand?
Mhm.
What do you make of that? The executions and everything, and think about what executions mean, in this country, and why you have southern states who are so aggressive in maintaining this type of capital punishment. You know, if it were the case that, well, and it's hard to imagine, but let's just say, if it were the case that that white males were the ones primarily um, who were the objects of these capital cases, I'm not sure. I'll put it like this: if white males, and it's hard to think about this now in terms of the way our society is structured or what have you. I'll put it like this: you would not have. It's very difficult for me to imagine white men being the face of these capital cases and
Mhm.
being the avatars
Mhm.
of social control and what
Mhm.
have you when it comes down to law and order in the United States.
Mhm.
I think it's a deliberate thing. It is an engineered thing, that the face of capital punishment is black and male.
Mhm. I would like to step back a few moments to something that you said in response to the recent election, and it concerns most specifically uh, an emerging class of Black women, largely educated, largely in the professional classes,
Yeah.
being anointed
Yes.
as a kind of denomination
Yeah.
of Anglo-American domination.
Yes.
Now, I'm sure that for many of our audience,
Yeah.
this may appear to be a bit confusing.
Mhm.
So I'd like to return to that for a moment, Ronald, and can you help us understand how it can be that someone can indeed be Black American, yet simultaneously practice and reinforce a doctrine of white supremacy? Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Barack Obama. Um, and when I say Barack Obama, that is, it's yeah, a black person can become the face of the empire,
Mm-hmm.
of imperialism, the face of American exceptionalism. Okay. Um, uh, Black women, the professional class. Okay. Um, they have been set up um, through social engineering, um, politics, and everything to assume the face of the empire. So when we talk about uh, Kamala Harris and say what you want to say, whether her identity or what have you, but or people like her, if we're talking about Black women as senators, Black women as mayors, Black women as judges, um, Black women in higher education, Black women across the professions and what have you, um, in the United States. Um, Black women have been used as shorthand
Mm-hmm.
um, for racial justice.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this in the book, and it's not something that Black women have orchestrated themselves. It's much bigger than them. And I point specifically to the white ruling class
Mm-hmm.
and the machinations of the white ruling class,
Mm-hmm.
and how the white ruling class made certain decisions decades ago about the parts of the Black population that it would incorporate, that it would bring into white capitalism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what I argue is that um, Black women became incorporated
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously with white women,
Mm-hmm.
with the women's movement and what have you. Um, so the thing was that, white white society has taken shortcuts
Mm-hmm.
to deal with the Black situation in America.
Mm-hmm.
So white society does not want to deal with reparations. It does not want to deal with any real structural transformations that would free up the entire Black population. So we've had to deal with policies. We've had to deal with the welfare state. We've dealt with affirmative action, family courts, so on and so forth, employment practices and everything. Now we're going through this whole thing with DEI as I speak. You understand? Um, and the argument that I make is that the white ruling class, particularly um, after the 1960s, the business class and what have you, the foundations and all of that, they were deliberate in terms of how they were going to social engineer the United States, how they were going to move the country away from a lot of the discord that was happening in the late 1960s,
Yes.
okay, by creating or instigating a Black middle class, the expansion of the Black middle class. You understand? And Black women have been a part of that absorption and that integration and everything into the professions and all that kind of stuff. So here's what happens um, is that it is sold to us as exceptionalism. It is sold to us as meritocracy. It is sold to us in a variety of ways. But what happens is that white people The white ruling class has had a way of hiding behind
Mm-hmm.
Black women in the expansion of its interests, and in doing so to minimize the idea in the eyes of the rest of the world that America is racist.
Mm-hmm.
You see, you can say to the world that, yeah, we're not racist
Mm-hmm.
because we got Black people, and we create tokens,
Mm-hmm.
and we will put people in, we would do what we have to do. Um, Here's the thing. I would say this. So, and that's why I initially spoke about Obama. When Obama becomes president in 2008, it happens at a very interesting time. It happens when George Bush has really damaged the image of the United States
Indeed.
all over the world.
Indeed.
Okay. And how do you, as an empire, rehabilitate your reputation and image
Mm-hmm.
after you have um, turned much of the world against you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You have a Black face.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And say, okay, we got a Black person here. We have these ideals about justice and race and all this kind of stuff. A Black face is good. You've got to rehabilitate your relationship with the Middle East. You've got to rehabilitate your relationship with other parts of the world that are not Anglo, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Based on your campaigns with terror and everything like that.
All that.
Yeah, so the point I'm trying to make is that this is a very real thing,
Mm-hmm.
that the Black American woman
Mm-hmm.
has been useful in this enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? The
It's the
professional
exploitations of her aspirations and
of her aspirations.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So white, the white ruling class can hide behind her
Mhm.
and propagate whatever its interests are
Yeah.
without being called racist,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
without being called sexist
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or misogynist.
Mm-hmm.
You understand?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the other part of it is, and here's the larger thing I talk about in the book, is that um, yeah, the race, anti-blackness is kind of minimized because from my standpoint, after the 1960s, um, the white ruling class decided that it was gender, it was the status of women
Mm-hmm.
that was most important,
Mm-hmm.
not the enhancement of a racial ethnic group, i.e. Black Americans. You understand? And
Mm-hmm.
so it corresponds with feminism and women's rights and all that kind of stuff. But here's the thing: the point I'm trying to make is that the black, the professional Black woman has been used as a type of savior, messianic figure in all of this
Mm-hmm.
kind of exceptionalism. You understand? Um, I guess one example I can use: Oprah Winfrey. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you create, you facilitate someone like an Oprah and what have you. And Oprah is a very, very good ambassador
Mm-hmm.
for American exceptionalism. You understand? And empire and all that kind of stuff. You can hide a lot of stuff behind Oprah Winfrey.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
And then other women have been useful in that regard and what have you. And so they turn them into saviors,
Mm-hmm.
and they turn them into magical figures. When I say they, I'm talking about the white ruling class. They transform Black women into these type of exotic entities that they
Mm-hmm.
can hide behind.
Mm-hmm. And I did want to briefly emphasize a point that you had made about President Obama,
Mhm.
which I think is very important in this particular situation. We're talking about the expansion of U.S. imperialism, as the
Mhm.
slave system of the West is called, and tightening the yoke around the continent of Africa. Now, part of the reason why then Senator Obama was allowed by the ruling class to assume office was
Mhm.
because it already had plans for expanding military power across the African continent. The journalist Nick Turse has written about this extensively. But to add considerable weight to your point, a number of conservatives, opinion makers, and people who had held office, from Colin Powell, former General Colin Powell, to Andrew Sullivan at the Atlantic, actually endorsed Obama specifically for that reasoning,
Mhm.
which you mentioned a moment ago, which was to put a black face
Mhm.
on imperialism. And
Mhm.
of course, also, famously following the first State of the Union address given by Biden,
Mhm.
Vice President Harris followed up on television by asserting erroneously that the United States of America was not a racist country. So,
Yes. Yeah,
um,
yeah, and that's it. And she becomes, and she's, interesting. Again, she's an avatar of what I'm talking about. And it's the avatar of a kind of exceptionalism um that can be legitimated
mhm,
because the face of exceptionalism is not white. The face of exceptionalism is not male. Um, and there are all sorts of interests that are behind that, you know. But we're sold. What we're sold exceptionalism. This is exceptionalism. That's what we're sold. We're sold the notion that this is a kind of virtue and what have you. Through identity and everything,
mhm.
and this person is going to save us.
Ha,
And that's the thing. Obama, and I write about it. Obama was seen as a messianic figure.
mhm,
Black people are seen. This is another way that the messianic thing is used. So
mhm,
if you're not using a black man or the face of a black man in terms of messianism in relationship to the empire, you can use a black woman as a messianic figure to
mhm,
propagate empire.
mhm,
You understand?
mhm,
Um, and that's and this is some redemptive, that there's a redemptive psychology morality that is tied to all of that. This black woman is gonna save us, or
mhm,
black women gonna save us.
mhm,
You know, there was a I remember, I think his name was Doug Jones. The man ran the Senate in Alabama, and I believe he was a senator. He was a Democratic politician or what have you. And and he was going against this white supremacist guy, and he happened to win. And he this is a white man who was very, very vociferous about black women supporting him
mhm,
and getting him in office and the black women's vote. So we're talking about the black women's vote, you know, and black women saving democracy. Here's the thing: black women saving democracy. Stacey Abrams saving democracy. Kamala Harris saving democracy. All of this stuff. You have Black Lives Matter. All of these things. You understand? The messianism is tied to that.
mhm,
Okay, and it has to be scrutinized. It has to be evaluated. Okay, um, because that messianism is tied to things that are very, very problematic. I'm going to
mhm,
put it like that.
mhm,
Um, Tied to interests that do not advance.
mhm.
40 million people, the black population in the United States, over 40 million people.
Now, I do want to remind our audience that if they have any questions that they would like to bring to this conversation, that is available in the chat, as it were. So please type those in if you feel so inclined. At the beginning of this conversation, we pivoted a number of times to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I'd like to read a quote from one of his better known speeches, certainly Beyond Vietnam, which took place on April 4th, 1967. Of course, he was assassinated 1 year to that date, as we properly understand, to send a message regarding what he had to say. So I will read this brief quote, and then Ronald, I'd like to get your response to it. I'm convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. With righteous indignation, it will look across the seas and see individual capitalists of the West investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries, and say, this is not just. It will look on our alliance with the landed gentry of South America and say, this is not just. The Western arrogance of feeling that it has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them is not just. A true revolution of values will lay hands on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just. This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of peoples normally humane, of sending men from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Ronald Neal, have we become spiritually dead? Have we passed that point that Reverend King spoke of?
Oh, those words they remain, prescient. Um, they were uttered so many decades ago and what have you. Um, and he's talking to us, he's talking to the United States right now. You
Right
know,
now.
um, those words are quite relevant. And I would say, yeah. I mean, we're still there. We have not undergone the type of revolution that King um, proposed. You know, no. We are still stuck, and I would say I would I would say it cuts across. With my work, I don't, in terms of the political spectrum, um, I don't favor one orientation over another. Um, the issues that I'm dealing with cut across. Doesn't matter whether you're right, left, moderate. You understand? I don't care what your ideology is. Um, you could be feminist, queer, or whatever, socialist. Um, we have some issue. We have some challenges that transcend ideology. And what you're talking about right there, this transcends. It transcends ideology. It transcends political parties. It transcends tribalism. It transcends a whole bunch of things.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about something that's pervasive.
Mm-hmm.
You
Right.
understand? And
Yes.
we talking about prophets, a big thing, prophets, um, and people as people and not as things.
Yes.
You know, that cuts across the spectrum. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And tragically, man, we are no, we're not there. We're still dealing with this type of um
Mm-hmm.
spiritual death. I would say, the good thing is that we have elements within our society that are still trying to keep alive. Um, you know, Cornel West would talk about he would call them the non-market values. Okay.
Yes.
These are non-market, basically that's what we talk about, non-market values. Okay.
Yes.
Um, as long as we keep that alive, I think we're doing a good thing. But we're not radically removed from the problems that King identified in 1967 when he was criticizing the Vietnam War. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Now, we're coming in on the end of the session, but I do want to remind our audience that I will certainly do my best to bring about a similar program with Ronald Neal and remind everybody again about the book Beyond Death and Jail: Anti-Blackness, Black Masculinity, and the Demonic Imagination. Um, but before we wrap it up, I wanted also to get your take. I'd asked you about this earlier about a sonnet, certainly one of the greatest in the English language. It was written by Claude McKay in the year of 1919. It was written during a period in the history of the United States known as Red Summer. Red Summer, red for a number of different reasons. Red because of the strident elevation of communist thinking throughout many citizens of the United States. Another thing that has been under erasure of late, but also because more poignantly, the widespread murder and specifically lynching of black men and boys that was taking place across the United States, Red Summer. And this particular poem has had, I think, in many ways, a life of its own. I mean, it has stood not just the test of time, but has become a rallying point for political and social leaders from the very moment it was written. I should also mention before I read it that it was read into the congressional record by Henry Cabot Lodge as a warning to the rest of the so-called white people in the United States that a new attitude was emerging among Black Americans. It's called If We Must Die. And Ronald Neal, I'm looking forward to your response and analysis of this. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us, though dead. O kinsman, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men, we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back. Ronald Neal.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna Remember Ahmaud Arbery,
Yes.
the black man? So you have the story of a black man who was running. I'm a runner. Um, and he was in this neighborhood, and this as the story goes, he was looking at some property, whatever, some white people, said he was looking suspicious or whatever. Anyway, followed by some white men in a truck who encountered him and engaged him. And he was outnumbered. Um, and they had weapons and all that kind of stuff. Um, and what Arbery did when he was confronted by these men, he chose not to run from these people. He chose to stand his ground. And he stood his ground, and he ultimately lost his life as a result of standing his ground. So that sonnet is about a noble death.
Mm-hmm.
It's about confronting your fears.
Mm-hmm.
If we must die, let's die a noble death. Let's confront our fears. Let us die knowing that we're dying with dignity, that we are dying with honor,
Mm-hmm.
we are dying with virtue.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we are not dying uh, to uplift uh, interests that are against us.
That's right.
We are dying in an honorable. If we must die, let us die in an honorable fashion. Let us die fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Let us not die fight. Let us not die on our knees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You understand?
Yes.
Um, that sort of thing. So it's that kind of sensibility when you have assessed what is around you, what the world. Um, it's you're willing to take a noble risk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, it's
Yes.
a good death.
Yes.
It's a good death. How do you want to exit this world? And I mentioned Ahmaud Arbery because
Yes.
here's the thing. The reason why I mentioned Ahmaud in light of that poem, and there's so much distance between how he got killed and what McKay said, in early part of 20th century or what have you. How do you want to leave this world? And this is something that I think people who are concerned about freedom have to ask themselves.
That's right.
How do you want to exit?
How do you want to exit?
Okay. How do you want to exit? And you can choose how you want to do this. Some people go out and we talk about a coward's death or whatever. There's so many compromises that we can do in our lifetimes, right? All of us are giving opportunities to compromise in so
That's
many
for sure.
ways,
So
and
many ways.
and to do things that we cannot live with, you know. The proverbial sellout, the proverbial Uncle Tom, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that if you've been given the fortune, particularly of living a extended period of time, at some point in your life, here's the thing. I'm going to say this. Cornell West. I'm teaching Cornell West's book. Um, Cornell West. put out a book. I'm teaching in the class is called Black Messiahs and Uncle Toms. The book is called Black Prophetic Fire, and it's a conversation between Cornel West and another scholar, a German scholar named Christia Buschendorf. And Cornel West put this book out because and it came out during the Obama era because Cornel West is concerned about what he regards as the Black prophetic tradition. So he talks about Frederick Douglass, he talks about W.E.B. Du Bois, he talks about Martin Luther King, he talks about Ella Baker, Ida B. Wells, Malcolm X, people in this canon who he considers a part of the prophetic tradition. And he feels, he is concerned that this tradition has been lost.
Mm.
He is concerned that we have too many compromised people out here,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
particularly among in the elite classes, compromised Black people in particular, men
Mm-hmm.
and women.
Mm-hmm.
And we have bought into the stuff that King was railing against in
Yes.
terms of the materialism and all the kind of stuff like that. We are now adjusted to injustice.
Mm-hmm. Inured to it.
Yeah, so the question is, do you want to leave this world that way?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you are a person, yeah, let me speak existentially. I'm among these, I teach at a rich white school.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a tenured professor. Okay. The opportunity to just turn my back if I want to just not even talk about this stuff and do the, you know what I'm saying? I can just, you know,
Yeah.
ride this thing out until I retire, move to Africa or something when I'm done. And that's it. And don't worry about anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is that what I want?
Mm.
What am I going to, how do I want to exit the world?
Mm-hmm.
Do I just want to be another Negro who, you know, through opportunity, chance, luck, all sorts of things, talent, landed where I landed and just had a pretty decent life, pretty privileged life, and that's it?
Mm.
Or do I want something? How do I want to go out?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's a
Am I
key
willing?
question.
Am I willing to stand for something?
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about Claude McKay, and and in some respects, there is some kind of martyrdom type of sensibility that McKay is.
Oh, certainly.
There's a
Oh, yeah, it's there.
martyrdom. Yeah,
It's there.
there's a martyrdom thing going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if you're gonna do that, um, yeah, be particular about how you want to go about it.
That's right.
You understand? So that's, that's what I hear, and that's what when I talked about Ahmaud Arbery, let me tell you something. As a Black man, as a Black American man,
Yes.
and when I saw that story that this young Black man, he was fearless. He refused to run from these white men, and he was willing to die.
Mm-hmm.
You're not. We talked about freedom earlier. You asked me a question about freedom. I'm going to be free. I
Mm.
refuse. Here's the thing. I refuse to accept this demand
Mm-hmm.
that we just roll over, that we
Mm-hmm.
can't be free,
Mm-hmm.
that we
Mm-hmm.
have to always compromise. We have to always capitulate to somebody else's interest,
Mm-hmm.
that we always have to make these negotiations. When can you live uncompromisingly in the
Yeah.
world
Yes.
as a Black person without
And
being
this
without being afraid of white supremacy?
mm-hmm.
Can you
And
get to
this
that?
this
Can you get to that place where you are not afraid of
mm-hmm.
white people?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this question becomes the axis around which many of these other concerns revolve.
Yeah.
But we're right at the end of our time, so I'm going to defer to Shauna. I think
Okay.
we had a question out there, but I'm not. I think we may have already reached the end of our time, Ronald. So I'm going to defer to Shauna on that. And Shauna, should we just go ahead and wrap it up? Go ahead and wrap it up. Okay. Thank you again, Ronald.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
We will be back.
It's been a wonderful conversation. Really, thank you both, Dr. Ronald B. Neal and Justin Desmangles. Really appreciate your time tonight.
Yeah.
And if you want to see what else is going on at the San Francisco Public Library, check out sfpl.org. We'll see you next time.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ronald.
Bye.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
All right.